The controversy over the purchase of 36 Rafale aircraft by the Modi government is far from over. On Wednesday, two former union ministers and a lawyer activist held a press conference listing out 22 points which included various concerns with the deal and a demand of a probe into this deal. The union government has responded saying the charges are baseless. To look at what is new in these set of allegations, I'm speaking now with former Union Minister Arun Shourie, who was part of the press conference. I'm also joined by defense economist and senior fellow at IPCS, Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, for his expertise as well as his contrarian view on this particular subject. Before we start, I would like to tell you that we have sent a request to Reliance Defence, the company in question, to come and participate on the show. They have responded with a statement and 6 points where they rebut the claims made in the press conference yesterday. We will be showing you these points on the screen and including them in the discussion as well. So let's begin. Welcome all. Mr. Shourie, I would like to start by asking you what was new in some of the allegations made by you and of course Mr. Yashwant Sinha and Prashant Bhushan yesterday, because the first response which came in from the government is that this has already been said and answered.
No, but what has been said and answered? You just now used a phrase which I saw on the internet that they say that the facts which we have brought out are baseless. In what sense? I mean, is it or is it not a fact that there was an original deal for which the request for proposal had been given out? It was for 126 aircraft. Fact or not fact? That eventually Rafale was chosen and that 18 planes were to come in a ready-to-fly condition and 108 were to be made in India. Fact or not fact? What is it that was there? That the Foreign Secretary, just 2 days before the Prime Minister's announcement in Paris, he actually was talking in terms of the old deal and saying that the negotiations are far advanced and that HAL is the one that is involved. Fact or not fact? That 2 weeks before the Prime Minister's sudden announcement, the chairman of Rafale, this Mr. Treppier, he was also talking in the same vein. So no explanation as to how suddenly 126 aircraft become 36 aircraft. And even in that announcement, is it a fact or not, the passages that we have listed in that they said it will be on terms which are better, that the contract includes everything, you know, weapon systems, everything is there. Fact or not fact? All these things are documented by statements of the government. Then the defense minister did not know. He was actually opening a mobile fish unit in Goa at the time. And when the announcement was made, if you see his statements, which are available on YouTube, you see him distancing himself from the deal. Is it a fact or not? Is it a fact or not that if it was a new deal, as it obviously was, you are required under Indian laws to float a new tender? And especially because the other rival, this manufacturers of Eurofighter, had already written to the government that we are prepared to reduce our price by 20%. Is that a fact or not a fact? Now, if it was to be changed from 126 aircraft to 36 aircraft, disregarding the requirements of the Indian Air Force, the Cabinet Committee on Security, I've been part of the Cabinet, Mr. Yashwant Sinha has been part of the Cabinet Committee on Security, that was supposed to formally take a decision on that. And it is clear that actually the matter went to the Cabinet Committee on Security only 1 year after the announcement of this deal, the new deal. Is that a fact or not a fact? Similarly, on the price, they say, oh, there's a secrecy clause. But is it a fact or not that this secrecy clause relates only to the technical specifications and to the operational capabilities of the aircraft? It doesn't relate to the price. is it a fact or it is not a fact that while the government now says they cannot reveal the price because of a secrecy clause, this very government, its Minister of State for Defence, answered the matter in Parliament, stating the fact of that each aircraft will cost 670 crores. And is it or is it not a fact that now it turns out that each aircraft will cost 1,000 crores more? And all this business about add-ons and so on, in the RFP, as well as in the announcements of Trappier, as well as in the announcements of this, the Minister of State for Defence in the Lok Sabha itself, all items are already included in the price. So what is the explanation for this increase by 1,000 crores per plane? And you want to come to Reliance and all, I'll do that, but on which of these things has the government answered?
Okay, Mr.
So
Shourie,
just to say it is baseless. I've been writing in India for 40, just one second, for 40 years, and every time some facts are brought out, every government says they are baseless. And later on, everything turns out to be correct. Similarly, on Reliance, is it or is it not a fact that this company was incorporated just 10 days before the deal was announced? Is it or is it not a fact that that company had absolutely no experience in manufacturing anything in aerospace and in any defense equipment? Is it or is it not a fact that they have had great difficulties in executing their projects? If you go from in the Delhi metro line to the airport, they had abandoned it midway. The Bombay line where you are, that was abandoned. I mean, we can go through so many things, what they have made of the telecom business.
So they've actually responded to a few of those points.
Just one second. Yes, so let me list the points. In the port which they bought, we had to have offshore patrol vessels. They should have been supplied to the Navy. They are not supplying those. So what is the experience? And would a company with the experience of Dassault have selected a partner on its own who firstly had no experience, who already had a debt of 8,000 crores, whose accumulated losses in the first year was 1,300 crores? Would they do it? Then I just want to ask the government and whoever this, my colleague is from this expert in this thing, is it or is it not a fact that the government has said now, oh, we had nothing to do with the selection of Reliance. It is something between two private parties. But is it not a fact that the guidelines for offsets released by this government say that no offset deal shall be finalized till it has been approved by the acquisition officer of the Defense Ministry and approved by the Defense Minister? Does the guideline say that or not? So how do you square these two statements? So I think you should please look at the history of government, especially of this government, in the kinds of claims it makes, types of statements it makes, whether it is on demonetization or GDP, anything. And look at the new statement in relation to the facts which have been brought on record by their own statements and by us.
Abhijit, you've heard the points Mr. Shourie made, and let me zero in on the question of offset, because the one new thing per se in these fresh set of allegations is the claim by the government that Dassault's choice of Reliance Defence has nothing to do with them. Mr. Shourie and of course Mr. Yashwant Sinha and Prashant Bhushan have provided papers that show that the government had to sign off finally. Do you think that puts the government statements in a new light?
Absolutely not, because I fail to see the contradiction out here. The government has to sign off on whatever Dassault chooses to be its industrial partners. Dassault chose 72 partners. They basically knew they had to choose at least one government partner, which they did, the DRDO, which gets about 9,000 crores. And the rest of it is for them to present the government. The government does a check to see if this is all feasible, if it matches the offset commitment in total value terms, and they sign off on it. The question of cronyism comes in if you prove that the government inserted Anil Ambani Reliance into the equation, which as of now there is absolutely no proof of any of that. There is not even the allegation of that as far as I can tell, or any allegation backed up by any fact, documentary or otherwise. It's that the Dassault came up with whatever industrial partners it chose and the government approved the offset plan. It's that simple. There is no contradiction out here.
Okay, on the choice of offset partner, Mr. Shourie, I just want to add what Reliance Defence has told us in its communication on this particular point that was raised. They say that offsets are claimed by the foreign vendor, in this case Dassault, when the obligations are due. For this 36 Rafale contract offset, obligations are due after September 2019, which is more than a year from now. They also go on to say, as far as the selection of Indian partners is concerned, it is always the choice of the foreign vendor. This position has remained unchanged since the last 13 years when offsets were first introduced in 2005. So these are the two counters to the point that has been made on the choice of Reliance Defence. And isn't that really at the crux of this whole debate? Because it can be argued that the government bypassing the process.
Firstly, Madam, that's just one of the points, but I want to deal with what very good points that Abhijit has made in regard to offset. Our understandings obviously differ in this, because as far as I understand, if you see the clause 8.6 of the defense offset guidelines, it says this became effective from April 2016. It says it's a mandatory requirement that all offset proposals, not after execution, all offset proposals will be processed by the acquisition manager. They will be processed. It's not just something that he will do retrospectively, and approved by the Raksha Mantri regardless of their value. This is the point. So I don't think that it is that in retrospect something will be done and all that the minister will do is sign, and all that the acquisition manager will do will be just, you know, say, okay, these people have done it, so what have I to do? He is to process the whole thing. And could somebody tell us, has the government said that they actually approved or not approved? After all, they are supposed to approve the proposals.
Yeah.
Not in 2019, but whatever the proposals were, they have to do. Similarly, to say that all these documents and all these things will be given only at the time of 2019, actually my good friend Anil Ambani wrote me a letter day before night saying all these 3-4 points. It doesn't address the issue. After all, if the whole period is over, I mean, supposing you and I are, and Abhijit, we are crafting a policy, all of us have acquaintance with the government, would we say, okay, you go on doing things, after you have done that, please come back to me and I will sign? No, the whole thing is, I will process your proposals and then you can proceed. So I can only say that Abhijit is, and his understanding and mine is completely different, and Yashwant Sinha, who's dealt with these things specifically, and his understanding is completely different.
Let me come to the core of the question on the Rafale deal.
This whole thing that,
as most people understand it.
This is not the core, madam. The core is, there are, as I mentioned to you, there are 3 points. One is how do you scale down from 126 aircraft to 36 aircraft? That's the core. The Air Force has, after a lot of work, said yes, we need 6 to 7 squadrons. The planes will be 80, and each squadron will be 18 to 21 planes. you suddenly lop off that thing and say, I'll get 36. That's the first element of the core, and no explanation at all. Second, the only justification that you give for the 36 aircraft, all to come by in a ready-to-fly condition, is, oh, they will be available very soon in 2 years. How much time has already passed? 3 years. In fact, we are now told that the first aircraft of this 36 will come only in 4.5 years after the deal was signed, and the total number of 36 will be available only by mid-2022. That's the core. Because we are dealing not with this offset and reliance and so on, and these people are inserting themselves into the whole issue. The real issue is the defense preparedness of our country and the requirements as assessed by the Air Force. That's the issue.
Okay.
Second issue, the core issue was that we will produce these, we'll get 18 out of those 126 in a ready-to-fly condition from France, and the other 108 we will produce in India. And the supplier will be obliged to transfer technology and will collaborate with us in the production here, so that we then acquire that technology and become self-reliant in the production of cutting-edge fighter aircraft. That's the core.
What is the precise allegation? Are we saying that this government flouted rules to benefit a company? When you say criminal misconduct, what are you talking about? Could you expand on what the allegations against the government are in reference to the Rafale deal?
First is the jeopardizing the security of the country by lopping off what were to be 126 aircraft to a fleet of just 36 aircraft. Second is depriving India of the occasion to learn to produce such aircraft within India itself. That's the core issue. Second issue is about the price. The government itself, not long ago, in 2016, in Parliament says it is 670 crores per aircraft. Okay? Now it turns out it is 1660 crores. That's about 1,000 crores difference. So that's an issue to be explained, especially in the context of the fact that the government itself has been saying, the request for proposal said, Trappier has said, the CEO of Dassault, that the price quoted and the price stated, which was 670 crores per plane, includes everything.
Okay.
And I can list you what they said, including weapon systems and this great famous helmet. Everything was included.
Yes, sir. You listed all these points.
I'm sure that Abhijit would be able to enlighten us.
Absolutely. Yes. You've listed all of these points.
Why do you just then say that the question? So that when you say about criminal misconduct, these are the ingredients of harming the public interest. And secondly, yes, there is a question of benefiting a particular company which does not have a record in this system. You know, you may know Anil Ambani as one of your subjects for interviews. I know him as a friend. So, you know, don't think that we are after any private company. Any other company, the same questions would have arisen, except that in this company's case, there is this record, there is this lack of experience, there is this debt. For the group as a whole, there is a massive amount of debt, as you know, from all your stories on non-performing assets.
Yes.
So, how would a foreign partner have zeroed in on such a company without a nudge and a wink from the government?
Okay.
It doesn't stand to reason.
Abhijit, let's contrast all of the points that have been made. Let's contrast all of the points that have been made with the responses we've had from the government so far. Do you think that these questions have been answered satisfactorily?
I'm not even going to defend the government on this. My issue here is with the 36, why 36, and why it was chopped down to 126. Now in 2012, if any of our so-called journalists had bothered doing due diligence, just looking at open source material, they would have realized that the price of these aircraft was 222 million euros upwards per unit at that point of time, which I said in a 2012 report. Nobody bothers looking at it. So as far as price goes, I'm not even surprised by this price. The basic bare bones airframe, 670 crores, totally believable. Everything else that you add on to it, for example, bare bones sometimes doesn't even include the engine, which can account to anywhere between 25 to 33% of the cost. After that, everything you add on to it, the reconnaissance pods, the air refueling pods, everything is an optional extra that you keep adding on. Like you go to a Mercedes-Benz dealership, you buy the basic car, and after that, everything you want, power seats, heads-up display, sat-nav, these are all additional costs. So Mr. Bhamre is absolutely right in the price he gave. Now, why did 126 come down to 36? Again, it has to do with the cost and the fact that nobody in India for a full period of 3 years from 2012 to 2015 seemed to be able to do something as simple as a fighter costing even from open sources. And I had written in that 2012 report that if you go in for 126 aircraft, it is going to come to close to about $40 billion, which is going to wreck your defense capital outlay for the next decade to come. All right. Now, here's the point. Once you knew that, that purchase should have either been abandoned or cancelled immediately. They didn't do it. They carried on negotiations for 3 years. And when you carry on negotiations for 3 years, in a sense, you're basically committed to it. Now, if you actually look at the defense procurement manual, there is no process for simply abandoning a thing. You show me one clause that shows you an abandonment procedure, or in fact, even choosing L2, the only provision there is for L2, in this case Eurofighter. You cannot accept a competing bid from Eurofighter. You have to give Eurofighter the chance to manufacture the Rafale, which means handing over all the Rafale's industrial secrets to the Eurofighter consortium, which is complete, as any industrialist will tell you, that is the height of stupidity. But this is how our defense procurement manuals are written, and there's nothing you can do about it. Therefore, 36 has there's a fairly good rationale to it. If you remember, when we got the Mirage 2000s, our last big procurement from Dassault, we bought 47 of them. Now, everybody at that time was asking, what does 47 do? Well, we know, because the Mirages were the primary nuclear delivery platforms that we had then. Is 36 enough for nuclear delivery right now? Yes, it is, because technology has moved on since then. The Rafale is a vastly advanced version of the Mirage 2000. Can 36 planes carry out the nuclear delivery? Yes. Is it the basic minimum? Yes. Is there an air defense gap? Yes. But here's the point. You can't conflate. My issue with this whole debate is that there is a conflation of too many issues. One is, why was the order cut? The order was cut very simply for financial reasons. You can't afford 126 of, forget the Rafale. You can't afford the Eurofighter, you can't afford the F-18, because these fighters are notoriously expensive. Remember, France, when we bought the Mirage 2000, France had an air force of almost 600 planes. Now the French Senate cap on the French Air Force is 187 planes. They've had to reduce the size of the Air Force to 1/4 of its total strength. So imagine if an advanced country like France is facing that kind of a budgetary crunch. Imagine what kind of a crunch we would face if we had gone in for 126 planes. Completely financially unviable. So 36 was the bare minimum, and there is the operational reason of the nuclear role, which I would say 36 is, I'm not entirely happy with it, but it's fine. From a purely tactical, operational perspective. Second is, why was HAL jettisoned and why was Reliance chosen? Well, I'm sorry, Reliance actually has a record of manufacture. Reliance Defense is basically the reincarnation of Pipavav Shipyards, which manufactures ships for the Indian Navy and so on and so forth. Now, if you actually look at the offsets, not one of those offsets is about manufacturing aircraft. It is joint development of technology, it is sharing of technology, and it is integrating these 72 companies into the French defense ecosystem's industrial supply chains. Because remember, Dassault is simply the lead integrator. There are lots of other companies involved, French companies involved in this, including Sagem, the MBDA missile company, Thales, and so on and so forth, which produces the radar. So what you're looking at is not the production of aircraft. So HAL not being chosen is a complete non-issue out here. And third, I think every single allegation that's been made here about process violation is a very, very selective reading. Now, I can't begrudge Mr. Shourie's interpretation of it, because he has every right to interpret it that way. The problem is there is no clear prima facie case made of even misdoing in this case. Incompetence, maybe. Bad communication, maybe. Definitely bad communication, definitely, but that's about it. There is definitely no case to be answered here for either other than miscommunication, realistically.
Okay, I'll let Mr. Shourie respond to that. Abhijit has put his points quite clearly. Yes, Mr. Shourie.
I'll do it very quickly. I think Abhijit has done a wonderful job for, as he said, for a government which did a shoddy job, in the sense that none of these things occurred to the government at all. Not credible. And second, if you go through all this, add-ons, buying a Mercedes and buying a plane, and actually speaking in the original documents, in the statements of the government, everything is included. So it's not just the frame that is being talked, or not just the wheels which are being talked. They talked of everything, and we read in the documents we have released, you will see what they have listed, including weapon systems, radar, everything is listed there. In fact, even subsequent servicing is listed there. So I don't see this. Third, about the overall cost, that is the point that the only point Mr. Parrikar made, even as he was distancing himself from the deal, saying, oh, this is Prime Minister Modi ki decision hai, isliye I support it. Subsequently, that was the only thing he said. He carefully distanced himself. Then he said, oh, it must have risen from a discussion of the Indian Prime Minister with the President of France, clearly hinting whether there was any technical work that went on in this. And why doesn't anyone see that, after all, another very good friend of mine, S. Jaishankar, was our Foreign Secretary and was in the absolute core team of Mr. Modi, not just on foreign affairs, but on security matters also. And 2 days before this announcement, he is talking in terms of the old deal. And suddenly, everybody is surprised that 120. Even nobody was calculating the cost of 126 earlier. Mr. Parrikar said, oh, that would have cost us 90,000 crores, and therefore we came down to how much now? 65,000 crores. A great saving, is it? So I really don't see that is the thing. Third point is, as Abhijit very nicely put it, that the old deal seems to have been cancelled. Now, we can go through these procedures at any stage, then I'll get other people whom you should really be interacting with, that when and I have done this in the case of disinvestment of government assets, that when you are negotiating for so many years, Abhijit, on a particular deal, on a particular set of documents, and you overnight decide to jettison that and go in for what you yourself say is a new deal, well, then government procedures, certainly, I don't know your understanding of it, but as somebody who's worked in government, there are very strict procedures to follow for a new deal, and that particularly involves going in either for a new tender or at least going back to the persons, to the entities that had qualified earlier, and saying, all right, this is the new config, this is the new thing that we want, please come and now give us your specifications and your production schedule, your prices, and so on. Fourth point that he made was about HAL. Actually speaking, it was about production, learning how to produce these aircraft, learning technologies. That's how ISRO has grown, with collaboration with others, including the French. We acquired technologies because we worked together with them, and you can see the success of ISRO. To say finally, to say that Reliance Defence is just a renaming of the Pipavav enterprise, that was only a port. We are now entering a completely new venture, and even on that port, as you know, the record of the previous company is such that they have not been able to deliver things, and whatever they had promised to deliver, and that was the obligation which Reliance took over, those offshore petrol vessels, they have entered into a dispute with that Gandhi person, Nikhilesh Gandhi, whatever, from whom they bought the company. So how is it just that the genes are transmitted? It's not just the changing of a signboard. That's not how these defense matters are assessed or should be written in reports in 2012. Firstly, in government, process is very important as it is in courts. Process is the defense of liberty. Here, processes are laid down, institutions are established, things have to go through, let us say the acquisition manager or the defense minister has to approve it for a particular reason, and that is accountability, and that is examination. It's not just a process. You seem to think so lightly of it. Secondly, it's not just this process, but as we have talked now for so long, it is the substance of the deal. The substance of what we require for our preparedness, and I'm sorry to say, but I can't just take Abhijit's word for it, but we would have to get the word of the Air Force. It's not just for delivery of nuclear weapons. We have two active fronts, and the Air Force has to manage those. It has to see what its coordinating role will be with the Navy in two contentious oceans. So to reduce everything down to, oh, we have so many nuclear weapons, we can get them across the borders in 36 planes, so it is enough. That's not, I wouldn't take Abhijit's word on this matter of what the Air Force requires. We should ask the Air Force. And it would be very good to know whether the Air Force produced any document whatsoever saying, yes, we don't require 126 planes, we require only 36 planes, because now our whole understanding of our security environment has changed. The example of France that was given, that they had so many aircraft, then they have reduced it to 120 or whatever it was, from 800 to whatever, is completely wrong. Look at the security environment of France and look at the security environment of India. A world of difference. France is very fortunate. Europe is at peace today. And the small little attacks which take place by some terrorist or some a truck driving into a crowd, those are not to be met by fighter aircraft. That's their security environment. Ours is very, very different. So these comparisons, I'm sorry to say that they are being flouted around as if they reflect some expertise, are actually just to divert the issue. Okay. So its process is important. Secondly, and you should see that in the judgments of the Supreme Court. I'm sure you must be aware of them. Look at judgments of the Supreme Court on any auction, on any government procurement. Process is very important. But secondly, even more important is substance. The security environment of India, the security apparatus that is assessed by the defense forces themselves.
A lot of reports which have quoted the three of you from the press conference, some of them say that the Rafale deal has been termed as a scam. With everything you've described, would it qualify as a scam in the traditional sense that we understand it, where there are either kickbacks or benefits in lieu of signing a deal or giving a benefit to a certain company?
Madam, on that we would have to look at the circumstances as a whole, but I feel there was a very good account there by Prashant Bhushan. You should ask him this question as to what does criminal misconduct mean in law. You can't keep saying, oh, this is how the public understands the word. There is a legal meaning to criminal misconduct, to misuse of office, which is what the two phrases that were used. It is in our codes. And you will be quite surprised to know that this is when we showed that these are the textbook ingredients of misuse of public office and amounting to criminal misconduct. Do you know that all those things, those clauses, were changed just 15 days or 10 days ago? Because somebody apprehends that the decision would be put against the touchstones which I am putting to you.
In light of these very detailed points that have been put across in the public domain, at the very least, should there not be a fair and transparent, independent probe into any of these to rule out criminal misconduct if that is what the government is claiming?
So here's the point. The probe mechanism is the CAG, right? And they're the ones that are, because they already have Official Secrets Act clearance, they're the ones that come do the probe and come out with the replies that we seek. And primarily, the reason we trust them more than a parliamentary committee is, if you remember when the Bofor's probe ended, it was purely the acquittal that was given was purely on a political basis. And I know it was Arun Shourie who did a lot of the work on that Bofor's thing, exposed a lot of it, and he knows how that acquittal happened in the Bofor's case, which was that one ADMK MP also resigned because of it, because he didn't feel he could acquit it on the basis of the facts presented to him. He had to vote to acquit on political grounds. But this is why the CAG, which is the apolitical body, you trust them to do it, and if they then find something, that's when you come up with a probe. But let's talk about the allegations of process violation here. Unfortunately, there has been, or fortunately in this case, there has been no process violation, because the deal was concluded not under the 2016 DPP. It was cleared under the previous DPP, the 2013 DPP. And what the 2013 DPP says in Articles 70, 71 and 72 is that when you have an intergovernmental agreement, you don't need to float a tender. And this is like the C-17s when we bought it from America, there was no tender. When we bought the Admiral Gorshkov, the aircraft carrier from Russia, there was no tender, because the assumption was we'd be getting all kinds of technology, industrial participation, which we did, fair enough. And there are consequences to backing out of deals like this, right? We knew initially the Gorshkov was offered to us for $200 million. The price shot up to $4 billion, from 200 million to 4 billion. M and B, big difference, right? That's like 20-fold, well, I don't know the maths right now, but 200 million, $4 billion. There's nothing you can do to back out of the deal because you've committed to it. It's the way the DPP is structured. Process violation, again, I think the government's got it wrong when they say that this is a new deal, because this really isn't a new deal. It's just a rehashed old deal, which the size has been slashed down, and they've decided to float a completely new program. Has there been process violation? I'm yet to see a clause in either the old DPP or the new DPP that points to process violation, because none of what this government has done with regards to the Rafale right now, be it announcing 36 aircraft or the whole 126, cancelling that old deal for 126, if you want to accept that this is a new deal explanation, violates any single clause of that DPP. The only thing that people then throw is saying, well, did you take a clearance from the competent financial authority? Now, this is where we have to bring in timelines. The deal was announced by the Prime Minister sometime in, 2014 or so, but it was signed in 2016. You need the clearance of the the CFA when you're signing the deal. I mean, tomorrow the Prime Minister is free to go to Tokyo and announce he's the Emperor of Japan. You know, there's no restrictions on it. He's free to announce that we're going to buy whatever from whoever. And one of the complaints the Americans, the Russians, all of that have with us very frequently is Prime Ministers go abroad, they announce they're going to do X, Y, Z, and usually 90% of those promises are never met. In this case, he made a commitment to buy 36. It went through, and all the process that was required for the signing of the deal, not the announcement of the deal. There is nothing in the DPP about the announcement of the deal, only about the signing of a deal. We're all followed, and if you go, and this has been solemnized under the previous DPP, all the procedure has been followed. There has been no procedural lapse.
Okay, last word to Arun Shourie, sir. What would you hope to see from the government as response?
I think that, Madam, firstly, you know, so many glib things have been said. Oh, the deal was announced 2014. Actually, it is in 2015 that the Prime Minister says this. Similarly, that the Prime Minister is free to announce that he is the Emperor of Japan. He's free to announce that you can that we are going to buy 36 or 126. That's just not the case, my dear friend. And if you were in government and doing those things, you would be really on the mat. Prime Ministers have to be extremely careful. Every minister has to be extremely careful. Look at the embarrassment of such a conscientious person and such an honest person as Dr. Manmohan Singh in regard to the coal auctions. In regard to, I mean, what happened in the case of the sector which I had cleaned up in telecom. So it's not just that you can go and announce anything and then you must, and the whole government must follow through. When such a drastic change takes place, it's not procedural. You have to go back to the Cabinet Committee on Security, and there must be a collective discussion about these matters in which, for good reason, several persons will hear the views of experts and not just journalists. So I think this is quite out of whatever is being said, and how the aircraft carrier goes from 200 million to 4 billion, and therefore that's just not, how does that justify anything now?
Yeah.
But on one point I think we agree, and that is Abhijit said that this parliamentary committee is not the right forum, because everything is decided politically. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, very much.
Okay, so you see, actually speaking, Abhijit, do you know what the Comptroller and Auditor General is? He is the Secretariat of a parliamentary committee. The reports of the CAG are submitted to the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. So I agree with you that yes, in the Public Accounts Committee, the political considerations will dominate, as they did, as you rightly said, in Bofors, which we then pointed out at that time. That is why 2 points are important, and I hope that at least on this we can agree that therefore Mr. Yashwant Sinha said on behalf of all of us that we would plead for a forensic audit by the CAG to be completed within 3 months. So on that we agree. Secondly, that as far as the working of the eventual processing of this report by the parliamentary committee is concerned, my plea yesterday was, and my plea now is to Abhijit, to Tamanna, to all of us, is that the media should do its job. Governments will continue to deny, governments will continue to use companies to front for them in denial so that they can have plausible deniability. But it is our job to excavate the facts which governments want to hide. That's very important, and that is how truth comes out. So I would add to I would agree with Abhijit. Yes, CAG, a time-bound audit, forensic audit in this. Then when it goes to the parliamentary committee, the Public Accounts Committee, then we should be very watchful of what happens there. And third, independently of these inquiries, the media must continue not to just say, oh, X said this and Y said this and Reliance has sent us this letter, but to actually do some work and try to excavate the facts themselves, including the 2012 report. Thank you.
We'll end it there. Thank you so much, Abhijit Iyer, and of course, Mr. Arun Shourie, for coming on the show and explaining a lot of the nuances of the Rafale deal, an issue which is talked about a lot politically, but not perhaps understood too well. We hope this program corrects some of those perceptions.